I want to thank everyone who has come tonight. We are grateful to everyone who is encouraging tennis and fostering such environments. Experiencing these things is truly the joy of my life. A real pleasure, Alex. Let's see. At the same moment, 10,000 individuals became silent. Not because they were instructed to, not because the game was over, but because the one person they had all come to see was leaving the court. And something in the building died somewhere along that walk. When the sole reason a stadium is filled vanishes in less than an hour and a half, what happens to it? When a tournament's biggest star isn't even in the top 10, what happens? And what happens to a sport that discovers all of a sudden that it built its entire moment around a 21-year-old who was never meant to be the story in the first place? Stay with me because this one gets stranger the deeper you go. Toronto didn't feel like Toronto 3 nights ago. It was as if a piece of Manila had been transported and deposited inside a tennis stadium in Canada. There are flags every place. Before she had even set foot on the court, families who had never seen a professional game in their lives stood in line for hours, phones out, and chanted a name. Alex was going to be presented, so a grown man in an inflated dinosaur costume danced as if his life depended on it. Midway through the competition, vendors were rushing to add a Filipino food to the menu, something that had never happened before. Additionally, because organizers had no other option, a 21-year-old ranked outside of the top 20 was given center court, a spot typically designated for legends. In just 30 minutes, she sold out a Wednesday night session. 30 minutes. Serena Williams is the only other player thought to have done that in the previous 20 years. It is important for what follows, so read it again. As soon as her match was confirmed, 3,100 tickets were sold. Nor more than a day, nor more than a week. Phones began ringing as soon as it was revealed and continued to do so. Later, the tournament director would almost helplessly acknowledge that lesser courts could not accommodate the amount of money she was bringing in, thus they could only physically place her on the largest court they had. This wasn't a successful week for a budding star. This was more in line with gravity. Furthermore, it turns out that gravity has a terrible tendency to abruptly vanish. Imagine this. Sunday night, the same stadium, the same intensity that had been building for 3 days in a row, thick enough to feel on your skin, is gone in only 73 minutes. The match is meticulously disassembled by Belinda, a Swiss veteran who is composed, quiet, and nearly unaffected by the ruckus around her. In the second set, 64-6 love, a bagel. The kind of scoring line that finishes a mood as well as a game. This is when it becomes awkward because Belinda isn't the antagonist. She's not even making an effort. In front of an audience that wasn't supporting her, she is simply a professional performing her job really well. She also doesn't brag after it's over. With her microphone in hand, she stands there and says something that sounds almost regretful. She is aware of their intended target. She makes it clear that she knows the majority of the audience was supporting her opponent, but she is still appreciative of their attendance. It's a kind thing to say. It also validates what everyone in that building already believed, which is heartbreaking in its own subtle way. They weren't there to play tennis. They were there for Alex and for her. Alex is no longer with us. The tale no longer revolves around a tennis match, so pay attention to what happens next. The stadium doesn't gradually empty. It releases its contents like air from a balloon. After 3 nights of being stretched over railings, flags begin to fall, fold, and be put into bags. The line that used to stretch around the corner every night at the food stand selling Filipino adobo has simply vanished. After years of covering this tournament, reporters begin to describe something they have actually never seen before. Within minutes, the sound of footsteps on empty pavement took the place of a crowd roar so loud it sounded like a Grand Slam final. One fan writes on social media that they are still in shock that a stadium sold out 3 nights in a row due to a single player. There is still awe. Everyone in that building just seen a phenomenon cease in real time, and none of them are certain it will return, so it's just curdled into something sadder. This is the bit that should actually make anyone who manages a tennis event nervous. This event was already a success before Alex ever arrived in Toronto. There were 9 of the world's top 10 players competing. There was a high turnout. The competition was expected to boost the local economy by around $60 million. This seems like a well-functioning, robust machine on paper. Then a 21-year-old entered. Not only did the equipment operate more efficiently, It changed into something completely different. The previous year, the competition had attracted its largest ever crowd. And it was on track to surpass that figure this year with her in the draw. Not because the best players were all of a sudden more thrilling. Not because the cost of tickets decreased. She was the one who changed the course of an event that had been going on for years before she had any involvement. It's not a fun fact. That's a red flag. And someone is silently beginning to perspire someplace in a boardroom. Let's discuss why, as this is where it becomes more emotive than merely statistical. In the Greater Toronto Area alone, there are more than 270,000 Filipino Canadians. Professional tennis has made a number of awkward attempts over the years to broaden its fanbase and attract groups of people who didn't think the sport was meant for them. Then, just after receiving a title that would define his career, Alex arrived and accomplished in a single week what marketing departments had not accomplished in 10 years. Tickets were purchased by families who had never seen tennis before. In order to secure a spot, elderly people who had never been inside the stadium arrived early. As soon as she touched down, a performing arts group filled an airport terminal with traditional music, making it seem as though she was coming home rather than traveling abroad. The mood inside the stadium, according to a co-founder of a fan organization, was strikingly similar to being back in Manila. Not reminiscent of or comparable to being there. That's hardly the usual zeal for athletics. Identity is that. That's a community refusing to let the moment pass silently after seeing itself mirrored on a stage it has never been welcomed to before. And that's precisely why her passing was met with such a different hush. It went beyond simple disappointment. It was sorrow for something that had felt like home for 3 nights. Now pay close attention to this thread since it's the unexpected twist. The player who ended the run, Belinda, isn't merely silent due to the situation. In fact, she likes it that way. She clearly lost her patience with a boisterous, excessively enthusiastic crowd during a match the previous year, yelling at a rival player's box to shut up and then confronting the referee about it. In an odd turn of events, this player represents the complete reverse of all that the previous 3 nights in Toronto symbolized. He performs better in silence. Therefore, the player obstructing the tournament's biggest draw wasn't just talented. She was almost designed with the party's conclusion in mind. Quiet against roar, calm against turmoil, and quiet one. Take a moment to consider that, as it completely reframes everything that came before it. This was more than an upset. It was a clash between 2 entirely different conceptions of what tennis should be like, and only one of them emerged with prospects of winning a trophy. This is the awkward question that directors of tournaments are currently muttering to one another. On camera, no one wants to say that. When your best player isn't your biggest draw, what happens? Because the men's tournament is currently experiencing a problem of its own, with some of its greatest names completely absent and finding it difficult to fill seats without them. Up until the point of her defeat, the women's event, driven almost exclusively by a 21-year-old who was not in the top 20, was exceeding everyone's expectations. One tournament director acknowledged that he had never witnessed a player ranked this far outside of the top 5 have this type of pull, and he was somewhat perplexed by his own remarks. He claimed that everyone in the industry is discussing it. Everyone in the room was thinking, even though he didn't say it, that this type of pull is also incredibly delicate. Because heroes like this, those who not only win games but also transform entire communities, are rare. Additionally, the entire business model that was developed around them suffers along with them when they lose early. That is no longer a hypothetical. In front of 10,000 witnesses, that is precisely what occurred in real time in Toronto. In the midst of all this talk about figures, reliance, and business strategies, where does that put Alex herself? Because a 21-year-old who recently lost a tennis match still exists somewhere in all of that. The thing that truly stops you in your tracks is what she said thereafter. She didn't discuss the loss at all. She spoke of her people. She said, almost too modestly, that she was only a tiny part of something far greater, something that belonged to Filipinos and their pride in their heritage. She described how she had discovered in just 1 week exactly how fervent, diverse, and compassionate her community could be. In some way, tennis has evolved into an odd platform for people to unite and celebrate their unique qualities. It doesn't contain any bitterness. Don't make any excuses. Just a hushed astonishment, like if she hadn't really experienced it. Just a hushed astonishment, like if she hadn't really experienced it. Anticipated to be the reason a stadium in a foreign nation felt like home for 3 nights. And that is the real story here, more so than any attendance record or ticket sales figure. Because a month ago, the entire sport was not prepared for this choice. Does it support this? Does the fact that a 21-year-old outside the top 20 can outdraw players rated far above her cause schedules, court assignments, and even meal menus to change? Does it acknowledge that communities that have always existed and are simply waiting for someone to represent them on a large enough stage may be the next great growth market for tennis rather than a new event in a new nation? Or does it handle this as a one-week oddity, a compelling tale to include in a highlight reel, and discreetly return to normal operations as soon as the stadium is empty and the flags are lowered? One well-known former player who was observing everything from the sidelines put it as succinctly as possible. It is no longer a curiosity when a fourth-round match is attracting watch parties in arenas back home. You would be foolish not to join that movement. So let's go back to the beginning. At the same moment, 10,000 people were silent. You now understand why. Not because there was no longer any competition in tennis. Not because the competition was a failure, but rather because one individual transformed a professional sporting event into something more like to a homecoming over the course of 3 memorable nights. She didn't simply take a match with her when she left the court. She captured the building's heartbeat. Now the flags are folded. There is no longer a line at the food stall. 4 other games, different nights, and different names, the stadium will fill up once more. Everyone present, however, is aware that it won't feel the same. Not for some time. Perhaps not until she returns to that court. Because they are now fully aware of how it feels in real life. And they will never be satisfied with anything less. That's the true tale that tennis wasn't prepared to share about itself. The one that was unintentionally made public during the entire competition.